Archaeology is a constant hunt for answers. The information archaeologists uncover about our ancestors usually comes in fragments, which means we almost never get the complete story behind a person, civilization, or object. But what if we told you there are some archaeological discoveries that were never supposed to be found in the first place? Well, not because nature kept them hidden, but because someone, somewhere, may have wanted them buried forever. Let's begin this list with number 15, Aramu Muru. Near Lake Titicaca in Peru, there is one of the strangest archaeological sites in South America. It's a massive stone doorway carved directly into a mountainside known as Aramu Muru, or the Gate of the Gods. The structure stands around 23 feet tall and contains a perfectly carved rectangular niche in its center, almost like an entrance leading nowhere. The best thing about it is that nobody truly knows who built it or why. According to local legends, an ancient priest named Aramu Muru used a sacred golden disc, known as the Key of the Gods, to open a portal within the stone. He and his followers supposedly stepped through the doorway and vanished forever into another realm. Archaeologists, of course, lean toward more practical explanations and believe the site may have been ceremonial, possibly connected to the nearby Tiwanaku culture. But even they admit the purpose of the structure remains unclear. Adding to the mystery are the endless stories surrounding the site. Visitors have reported strange blue lights, unusual experiences, and even disappearances nearby. Whether any of those stories are true or not, Aramu Muru still feels less like a monument and more like something waiting to be opened. Number 14. The Cheruti Mastodon. Back in 1992, construction crews working near San Diego found something that looked ordinary at first, a pile of ancient mastodon bones. But once archaeologists got involved, the whole thing turned into a nightmare for mainstream history. The bones weren't scattered randomly. They had been smashed apart in a very specific way, the same way humans crack open large bones to pull out marrow. Nearby sat heavy stones that looked exactly like hammerstones and anvils. Then came the date, around 130,000 years old. And that number hit like a truck because the accepted story says humans only reached North America roughly 15,000 years ago. If the Cheruti site is real, then somebody, either humans or another human relative, was walking around California more than 100,000 years earlier than science had been teaching. Critics, of course, didn't believe it. Some blamed construction equipment, and some claimed natural breakage. But even today, supporters argued the fracture patterns were too deliberate to ignore. Number 13. The Oklo reactors. In 1972, scientists in France were testing uranium ore shipped from a mine in Gabon when something immediately looked wrong. The uranium carried an unusual isotope ratio that shouldn't naturally exist. Normally, uranium deposits across Earth follow identical patterns, almost like a fixed rule of physics. But this ore looked depleted, as if it had already been used inside a nuclear reactor. At first, researchers assumed contamination, faulty measurements, or some kind of processing mistake. The truth turned out far stranger. Nearly 1.8 billion years ago, conditions deep underground at Oklo became perfect for a natural nuclear chain reaction. Water flowing through uranium-rich rock acted as a moderator, allowing the deposit to function like a gigantic self-operating reactor. It switched on and off repeatedly for hundreds of thousands of years before finally burning itself out. Long before humans existed, the Earth itself had figured out nuclear fission. Scientists still study the site today because the radioactive waste remained surprisingly contained for almost 2 billion years. But still, some think it was made by humans. Number 12. Thonis Herakleion, the Egyptian Atlantis. For centuries, Thonis Herakleion sounded more like a legend than a reality. No archaeologists or historians agree it exists. Ancient writers mentioned it as a great Egyptian port city, but nobody knew where it was. so that's why many scholars thought it had simply disappeared into myth. But then, in 2000, underwater archaeologists found it resting beneath the Mediterranean Sea near the mouth of the Nile. Before Alexandria rose, this was one of Egypt's most important gateways to the outside world. Ships came through here, trade moved through here, and Egyptian and Greek cultures met here long before anyone fully understood how closely connected they were. Divers uncovered huge statues, hundreds of anchors, temple remains, and dozens of shipwrecks buried under the water. The city had not just faded away, it had been swallowed by the sea. Thonis Heracleion proved that some lost cities were never imaginary. Number 11. L'Anse aux Meadows, Vikings in America. Most of us grow up hearing that Columbus reached America in 1492. It was like a word written in the stone. But L'Anse aux Meadows proved that Norse sailors had crossed the Atlantic nearly 500 years earlier. For a long time, the old Vinland sagas were treated like stories with more legend than truth. Then, in 1960, archaeologists uncovered an 11th century Viking settlement in Newfoundland, Canada. The site had sod buildings similar to those found in Greenland and Iceland, along with clear evidence of ironworking. That detail mattered because it showed this was not just a temporary stop where people camped for a few days. The Norse had built, worked, repaired, and lived there. This discovery changed the history of exploration. It proved Europeans reached North America long before the famous voyages of the 15th century. L'Anse aux Meadows also showed the Vikings were not only raiders with axes and ships, they were long-distance explorers brave enough to cross an ocean and build in an unknown world. Number 10. The Troy Lower City. For centuries, Troy was treated as pure legend until archaeologists finally uncovered ruins in Turkey during the 1800s. But once the excitement faded, many historians started downplaying the discovery. The ruins looked too small. According to the academic view, Homer's Iliad had massively exaggerated everything. Troy was supposedly just a modest hilltop fortress, not the giant, wealthy city described in ancient poetry. Then, in the 1980s, German archaeologist Manfred changed the entire argument. Using magnetic imaging equipment, he scanned the land surrounding the visible ruins and found evidence buried beneath the fields. The famous citadel on the hill wasn't the whole city at all. It appeared to be only the upper palace area. Hidden below was a massive lower city containing defensive trenches, streets, workshops, and homes for thousands of people. The discovery triggered a brutal academic fight. Critics accused Kaufman of exaggerating the findings for publicity, while supporters argued the evidence finally showed Troy had been far larger and more crucial than scholars wanted to admit for decades. Number 9. Glozal. In 1924, a boy in rural France was plowing a field when the ground suddenly collapsed beneath him. Hidden below was a strange underground chamber packed with thousands of artifacts. Clay tablets, carved bones, mysterious figurines, and symbols no one could properly identify. The site became known as Glozal, and almost immediately it exploded into one of archaeology's ugliest battles. Some experts called it one of the greatest discoveries in European history. Others called it a ridiculous fraud. The situation spiraled so badly that police raided the farm, and the teenager who discovered the site ended up being dragged into lawsuits accusing him of running a scam. For decades, mentioning Glozal in serious academic circles was enough to get people laughed at. Then carbon dating arrived. Tests during the 1970s showed the artifacts came from wildly different periods. Some were medieval, some Iron Age, and some even older. Oddly enough, that actually made sense. It suggested the location had been reused by different cultures over thousands of years. The one thing the tests destroyed was the claim that the entire site had been faked. Number 8. The Sibudu Cave Arrowheads. Well, you might think bows, arrows, and clever hunting tools came much later in human history, But Sibudu Cave in South Africa tells a different story, one we've missed for a very long time. Back in 2008, researchers found tiny stone points that may have been used as arrowheads around 70,000 years ago. That means humans were building serious weapons far earlier than many people expected. The discovery did not stop there. Archaeologists also found traces of blood, bone glue, plant materials, and even evidence of bedding made with medicinal plants that helped keep insects away. That detail almost feels too smart for such an ancient site, but that is the point. These people knew exactly what they were doing. The glue used on the tools was especially impressive. It required plant gum, red ochre, and careful heating. Too much heat, and it failed. Too little, and it failed. Sibudu Cave proved our ancestors were not simple survivors. They were engineers, chemists, hunters, and problem solvers with sharp minds. Number 7. The Topper Site. Along the Savannah River in South Carolina sits a place called the Topper Site, and for years, nobody thought it mattered much. Then, archaeologist Albert Goodyear kept digging deeper than everyone else dared to go. At the time, mainstream archaeology treated the Clovis people as the first Americans, arriving around 13,000 years ago. That idea was basically untouchable. But Goodyear started finding stone flakes and possible tools buried far below the Clovis layer in soil, estimated to be around 50,000 years old. That immediately sparked outrage. Critics accused him of mistaking naturally broken rocks for tools. Some even warned that pushing the idea further could destroy his career. But Goodyear fought back. He pointed out there were no rivers or fast-moving water sources nearby capable of naturally shaping stones into those sharp-edged forms. The deeper layers kept raising questions nobody wanted answered. If those objects really were tools, then humans reached the Americas tens of thousands of years earlier than textbooks and historians claim. The debate still hasn't died. The evidence refuses to disappear, and that makes a lot of researchers around the world deeply uncomfortable. Number 6. The Blombos Cave Paint Studio. For a long time, experts believed humans began thinking symbolically and making art in Europe around 40,000 years ago. Then Blombos Cave in South Africa stepped in and ruined that neat little timeline totally. Inside the cave, archaeologists found proof of a paint-making workshop around 100,000 years old. There were shells used like mixing bowls, bone tools, grinding stones, and pieces of ochre marked with geometric patterns. These were not random scratches from bored cave people. They showed planning, design, and a mind already working with symbols and materials. The people at Blombos were likely making pigment for body paint, decoration, or some kind of meaningful display. Whatever the exact purpose was, it proved early humans were doing more than eating, hiding, and trying not to die. They were creating. They were experimenting. They were thinking in color, pattern, and meaning long before the old history books gave them credit for it. So in other words, our ancestors were real geniuses. Number 5. World War I soldiers. In 2015, archaeologists working in Flanders found something both rare and heartbreaking: the remains of 125 World War I soldiers inside a preserved German trench system. The site had been hidden beneath land that later became part of a housing development, untouched since the war ended. Most of the men were German, but British, French, and South African soldiers were also found there. The trench sat on Hill 80, a ridge that saw brutal fighting during the war. Some soldiers were found exactly where they died, while others had been buried in mass graves by their comrades. Alongside the bodies were personal objects: watches, crucifixes, rosary beads, and even a bottle of HP sauce. That last detail hits harder than expected. It reminds you that these were not just names from a war book. They were men eating, praying, waiting, and trying to stay alive in a place where death was basically part of the weather. Number 4. The Thomas Quarry Fossils. For many years, scientists, archaeologists, and historians have argued over where the earliest branches of the human family tree truly began. Then fossils from Thomas Quarry in Morocco added another serious piece to the argument. Announced back in 2026, these remains were dated to around 773,000 years old, placing them deep in a period that matters hugely for human evolution. The fossils show a mix of older and more modern features. That makes them important because they may sit close to the split between the ancestors of modern humans and other human relatives who later spread into Eurasia. In simple words, these bones come from a time when the human story was still being shaped. What made the dating especially powerful was the use of Earth's magnetic history. Scientists used a major magnetic reversal from nearly 800,000 years ago as a natural timestamp. Thomas Quarry showed that human evolution in Africa was not happening in one small corner. It was wider, older, and more complicated. Number 3. The ghost ancestor, Homo naledi. Well, now this discovery is simply history-changing. Deep inside South Africa's Rising Star cave system, archaeologists found a human ancestor that did not fit neatly into the story we thought we knew. The passages leading to the chamber were so narrow that only very small experts could squeeze through. And once they reached the bones, the discovery became even stranger. The species was named Homo naledi. It had a small brain, roughly the size of an orange, but its hands, feet, and body showed features that looked surprisingly human. That mix alone was enough to confuse experts. But the biggest shock was where the bones were found. Some researchers believe Homo naledi may have placed its dead deep inside the cave on purpose. If true, that means a small-brained human relative may have practiced a behavior once thought to belong only to modern humans. Homo naledi reminded us that evolution was not a clean ladder. It was messy, crowded, and much stranger than we imagined. All right, now, let's move to number 2, the Spontian coins. For more than 300 years, strange Roman gold coins discovered in Transylvania were treated like a joke. They carried the face of a man named Spontian, except there was one problem. Official Roman history never mentioned an emperor by that name. Historians labeled the coins as crude forgeries made sometime in the 1700s and shoved them into museum drawers where nobody paid attention to them again. Then, in 2022, researchers decided to re-examine the coins using powerful electron microscopes. Suddenly, the old story started collapsing. The surfaces carried microscopic scratches and wear patterns consistent with coins that had circulated as currency for years inside leather pouches. Dirt deposits and chemical analysis also showed the coins had been buried underground for centuries, not manufactured recently by some clever counterfeiter. The best theory now is that Spontian may have been a military commander trapped in an isolated Roman province during a time of chaos. Cut off from the empire and desperate to stabilize the economy, he likely minted his own money. History forgot him, but the coins didn't. Number 1. For the Toraja. Funerals never end. For the Toraja people of Indonesia, death is not treated as a sudden ending. Instead, it is seen as a long process that can continue for months or even years after a person has died. When a family member passes away, the body is preserved with formaldehyde and kept inside the home rather than immediately buried. During this time, relatives continue speaking to the deceased, bringing them food, and treating them almost as if they were still alive. The reason for this unusual tradition is partly cultural and partly practical. Torajan funerals are massive community events that can cost enormous amounts of money, so families often spend months saving for the ceremony. Once the funeral finally takes place, it involves large gatherings, ritual sacrifices of buffalo and pigs, and burial inside elaborate rock tombs carved into cliff sides. Perhaps the most unsettling tradition of all is manini, a ritual where families exhume the bodies of deceased relatives, clean them, dress them in fresh clothes, and carry them through the village before returning them to their graves once again. What do you think about these discoveries? Let us know. And be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.